president of George Washington University. So we are really pleased to have him here today to discuss the African presence in the Revolutionary War. And with that, sir, you can take the stage. Thank you for coming.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I will feel fairly comfortable speaking to this group because you're about twice the size of my family. I am the oldest of 9 children. My name, as you can see, is Meldon S Hollis Junior. That S stands for Stonewall Jackson. My name is Meldon Stonewall Jackson Hollis Jr. At one time, my name was Charles Bernard Meldon Stonewall Jackson Hollis Jr., but my father got rid of the Charles Bernard to make sure I became a junior. The Stonewall Jackson is a story in and of itself. My great-grandfather was born in 1863, so the war was just about over, and he was named Stonewall Jackson. That was his name until after the war, and he became Stonewall Jackson Thornton. What I want to do is first do a commercial. I sit at the chair of the Gullah Museum of Hilton Head Island, and on Saturday we will be doing the 9th annual Gullah Food Festival, so the flyers are here if you have any interest. I don't know how many of you have ever seen the shouters who do the traditional dances, the traditional circling as they chant, do the chants that are part of the Gullah culture. So we will have the shouters. We will have Pearlie Sue, who is a storyteller from Beaufort. All of this, I think, you'll find entertainment. And we were able to find some singers who are all about our age, and they're 70s and 80s, and who sang these songs the way they were meant to be sung, the way they learned it as a child. And I always find that interesting and inspiring. So we pray for no rain, so we have no rain today, so we won't have it on Saturday when we have our event. I put some books here. I teach African American studies when I have the chance. I'll just tell you the class I teach was canceled for this semester. I got a short note about something about new standards and teaching African American studies, and of course my talk was at the USCB campus here. And so this might be a rebellion teaching something about African American studies, but we'll see. I want to point out something that's very interesting to me. I will mention the fact that there are African Americans who belong to DAR, the Daughters of the American Revolution. And this book is a very rare book. It is a book that lists African Americans and Native Americans who are descendant from those folks who fought in the American Revolution. The book is about 700 pages long. At around page 500 or so, there's a description of the African American participation and their descendants. It's a rare book. I was pleased to see it, and there may be some people in this room who are descended from African Americans who participated in the Revolutionary War. The Gullah people have been on Hilton Head for at least 300 years. But most of the history that we talk about has to do with the Civil War and what happened after the Civil War. But I wanted to make the point that from the time Squire Barnwell moved on to Hilton Head Island, he did not cut those trees down himself, okay? Did not clear those fields himself. He brought Africans with him. We concentrate mostly on Michigan because of its historic importance, but I just wanted to make that point. I'm going to start by saying a little bit about what it means to be an African American. Let's see if this works. Is there something else?
The right arrow?
Yes, I'm hitting the right arrow. I need to point it in some direction. alternative way to do
Yeah,
this.
and I'll go get my batteries.
Okay. I think there's an alternative way to do this. Let's see if this works. This is not. Yeah. I am a 9th generation South Carolinian. And I'll tell you how I know that. My grandchildren will be 11th generation. The Gullah people have 2 categories of people. There's the Binya and the Kamya. Binya, of course, has always been here. And the Kamya, people who've just gotten here. I belong to a 3rd category, which is called Frumya. I was born here, went away, and come back, and so people ask me which category. I say I'm Frumya. Okay, I was born here, went away, and I come back, and I can point to my ancestors going back 9 generations here in South Carolina. I started digging around in my own, what brings me here is I started digging around in my own family while in graduate school many years ago, taking a course in Southern history from then a giant in Southern history, Dr. George Calcott, who was much published in this area. And one day I went to him and I said, look, I'm a Southerner, I was born up in the South, and I've listened to you all day, and I haven't heard anything about folks who look like me, and I know we were always there, and this was going on. These stories you're telling were going on. What happened to those folks? And he said, well, you know, Hollis, why don't you start digging? I'm going to give you an assignment, and what I want you to do is start by going back and looking at your own family, and see what you learn by doing that. And I've been on this trail ever since. It's just been so exciting and so interesting. And I hope you will find some of this stuff as interesting as I found. This is the yellow areas of my great-great-great-grandfather named Caesar. The interesting thing about that notation in the 1880 South Carolina census is Caesar is 90 years old. If Caesar is 90 years old in 1880, that means Caesar was born in 1790. Now, Caesar's notation is that his parents were born in South Carolina. Okay, so I assume his parents were older than 10 years old. Okay? Which means we get back past 1780. And that gets us back during the times the Revolutionary War was going. Now, if his parents were born in South Carolina before, let's say, 1770, their parents may have been born in this country, but certainly we get back one more generation now, right? So we will down past 1770. So we're down, I can say, with some authority, just by rational, looking at this, that my ancestors were here before the Revolutionary War and were there for the Civil War. So now, if you are of African descent, and if you were brought here on ships in sails, I can't tell much by your last name. You tell me your name is Meldon. I said, on your father's side, on the male side, Ireland is in your background. If you give me a name that sounds like it's Italian, I can say, okay, at least on the male side of your family, there's some Italian roots, and I can do the same thing for the English. But if you're an African American, it is not clear where that last name came from. And there are 2 issues that happen. If you are chasing your family history and you're African American, the name may or may not mean something. And you don't have last names before 1860, right? So it's a little bit more difficult than the regular circuit. But anyway, so my last name is Hollis. And for 4 years, I was the assistant to the president of Harvard University. And I want to show you something that is curious. It's still not, the battery is still not going, so maybe I don't have it plugged in properly. But I wanted to show you something that's curious. Every day, when I walk through Harvard Yard to my office, I had to walk past a plaque that said Hollis Hall. It's curious, as you can see. built in 1763, named in honor of Thomas Hollis. And the other interesting thing is this particular hall is so old, it was used as a barracks by colonial troops. Now, I don't know what this Hollis family is, but if I can find them, I intend to send them an invoice. Obviously very wealthy people, and somehow we got their name. Actually, I don't know how we got that name, but
They owe you some money.
you can imagine. My name is Hollis, and I'm the best Hollis Hall in Harvard Hall. So the Hollises would have obviously been here for a while, and now obviously have done very well for themselves. They were contributing to Harvard College back before the Revolutionary War. They somewhere are well established now. If you run into one of them, tell them I'm looking for them. So I think we're gonna have to work this from this bench.
Sorry about that.
We'll get through this. To teach the history of African Americans, or the Africans who were brought here, means you often have to fight some mythology. On Monday, some people will be celebrating Columbus Day. When I was in the first or second grade, somehow I came to the conclusion that the Pilgrims were the first people to land in the United States right around this 20 and did stuff about Thanksgiving with the turkeys and all that. And then later on I found out, some folks had landed in these British colonists had landed in Virginia before 1620. Much to my surprise, because I went to a school system where it all started with the Pilgrims. When I find out that they landed in, the Pilgrims. The Pilgrims were trying to go to Virginia, by the way. They got lost in a storm and landed in Massachusetts. And the captain told them, I only have enough supplies to get back to England, so you're all gonna have to get off here. All right, and that was a surprise to me, because I thought they were trying to get to Massachusetts. They were trying to get to Virginia, they ended up in Massachusetts. The things you find out when you dig around in the history books and the documents are really surprising and interesting. I wish everybody had some of that. So Columbus landed in the Bahamas. And when he landed in Cuba, he made 4 trips. And with one of them, he landed in Cuba and thought he landed in India, okay? And so we ended up calling the indigenous people who lived here Indians, right up until nowadays we begin to clear that up. But this guy was lost and he thought he'd hit India, okay? And as a result, we've been calling the indigenous people who live here Indians for 300 or 400 years, because Columbus thought he had landed in India. Your grandchildren, if not you, are watching Disney productions about Pocahontas and how she's love-struck and is chasing this guy named John Smith. In fact, when John Smith met Pocahontas, she was somewhere between 10 and 12 years old. It's all made up stuff. It was his story, history, okay? That's the way it's recorded, and your children will grow up, or your grandchildren, singing stories about Pocahontas. But I assure you, Pocahontas was not chasing that guy when she was 10 or 12 years old. It has become current now to talk about the landing at Jamestown of African Americans who were taken off a ship. There were 20 of them. And so now much of the country thinks that 1619 landing was the first time that people of African descent came to the United States. By that time, Africans have been walking around this continent for at least 90 years. It's interesting that we will be celebrating the 250th year of what we call the birth of the United States. We'll bear down on that a little bit, thinking that 1776 is the year of the birth of the United States. But this is the 500th year of Africans landing on this country as recorded. They landed with the Spanish in 1526 at the mouth of the Piedmont River. We'll talk about that just for a second, just because it's an important day. Abraham Lincoln did not free the slaves. Abraham Lincoln signed an Emancipation Proclamation, and we'll talk about what that meant, but that did not free the slaves. The slaves were freed by the 13th Amendment. Mr. Lincoln did not have the authority to free folks, but if we want to dig into that, we can. But at least for those areas that were under Union control, he could make some judgments and make some statements about those folks being free. We'll see what that meant. And then slavery did not end on Juneteenth in Texas. Slavery ended with the enactment of the 13th Amendment, and that's when folks actually became free. That's when slavery ended in the United States. Just for those of you who are history buffs, this is a point I like to make fairly regularly, and that is about the Emancipation Proclamation. When Mr. Lincoln enacted the Emancipation Proclamation, that was the 6th time that black folks living in this country had heard an Emancipation Proclamation and had been told that they could escape from where they were, they would be free once they got behind enemy lines. When you think about the establishment of this colony called South Carolina, one must remember that just south of this colony called South Carolina, this place was Spanish. Okay, there was competition going on between among the Spanish, the French, and the English for the establishment of an empire in this area. And then actually some Native Americans had some claims for this land too. So there's a battle of these 4 cultures about the establishment of this colony. Well, the Spanish thought that this place ought to be Spanish. After all, they had been here long before the British. They had established a place over on Paris Island called Santa Elena. If translated to English, that's St. Helens. Maybe you all heard of St. Helens. And there is a reason that one of the streets on Hilton Head Island is called Spanish Wells, and that's because that actually was a place where the Spanish stopped on the way down to Florida to get fresh water for their boats. What you should know is that with the British impeding upon what the Spanish thought was their land, the Spanish issued a declaration in 1693 that anyone who escaped, who was held in bondage and who escaped from the forced labor units called plantations and got to Spanish territory, they would be free. That's the same thing that the Emancipation Proclamation says. Basically, this is 1693, okay? And Africans in this part of the world heard that and understood it. And if you know anything about history, this area was a constant traffic of African Americans escaping plantations or forced work units in South Carolina, going south to get to free area, which was the Spanish area. And in 1733, the Spanish issued a second declaration. Again, if you could escape British-held plantations and farms and get to Florida, you would be free. It's an Emancipation Proclamation, okay? And we haven't even gotten to the Revolutionary War. So we get to the Revolutionary War. The Revolutionary War starts in April of 1775, but on November 7th, 1775, Lord Dunmore, who was the governor of Georgia, issues an Emancipation Proclamation. And he says that if you leave an American farm or American plantation and come over and join the British, you will be free. Okay, this is 1775. I'm saying this because you need to understand that African Americans who were on the plantations and in this area constantly heard that if you leave these plantations and join us, we'll be free. And so by the time we get to Abraham Lincoln, it's the 6th time they heard that. Okay, so during the Revolutionary War, Governor Dunsmore, before there is a Declaration of Independence, but during the Revolutionary War, says to Africans, if you can get off these farms and come to join the British, you will be free. And we'll talk about the impact that had.
I think this is working now, sir. Why is it? It works for a minute and then it doesn't. I am
Well,
beyond.
we'll live through it.
Yeah, I understand.
So that's during the Revolutionary War. 100,000 Africans disappeared from the revolutionary side during the Revolutionary War. and we'll spend some time talking about the impact that it had, particularly in South Carolina, with 25,000 people left the plantations, okay, and ran to join the British, and many of them left with the British. When the British left, June 30th, 1779, the Philipsburg Proclamation, this again is the commanding general of the British, he issues another Emancipation Proclamation. If you leave your plantation and join the British, particularly join our armed forces, you will be free after the war. Now you can imagine what kind of tension that's causing in the United States, particularly in South Carolina and Georgia, where, as I will show you in a minute, the Africans outnumbered the white settlers. Okay, what kind of tension is this? You're telling folks that if they leave my plantations and join you, they'll be free, and you wake up and some folks are gone when you get them in the morning. And then there's the War of 1812. The British were back and we're fighting again. And again, Admiral Cochrane says, if you leave these farms and join me and my ships, you'll be free. So, I mean, this is the 5th time Africans are hearing this, right? Get up, leave these places, join us, and you'll be okay. So I hope I'm beginning to shape something that's something that you would not have considered before when we're looking at how to think about African presence in the Revolutionary War. And then finally, the Emancipation Proclamation that everyone knows about, which is that of President Lincoln at the end, rather during the Civil War. So I hope, just going to this issue about the 6, let's see if I can go backwards. There we go. Let's see, what are the points I need to make? Studying African American history, just to give you a very quick overview, because these things need to be understood if you can put it in perspective. About 12.5 million people were taken forcibly from Africa and brought to the Western Hemisphere over a 300-year period. But what most people do not know, just because it gets mixed up, is only 5% of them came to North America. 5 million of them went to Brazil. 5 million of them went into the Caribbean. And many of the people who we call Africans in this country were brought to this country from the Caribbean. They did not come necessarily from Africa, particularly in South Carolina. The Charlestown, that we now know as Charleston, was established by settlers from Barbados, okay? And so there are people in this room who, having traced their ancestors, find that they came from, when they look African Americans, who find that their ancestors came from Barbados, which does not surprise me because I understand that that's what first established South Carolina. About 300,000 soldiers fought in the Revolutionary War. About 5,000 black patriots listed and picked up by historians. But what we normally don't talk about is the 25,000 to 30,000 that fought for the British, because that's a different story. The Africans, especially in the South, overwhelmingly sided with the British. Now, I don't know that you can properly call the Africans who were involved in the Revolutionary War either patriots or loyalists. Let's think about this. There's some folks who've been brought in chains from Africa, and a Revolutionary War is going on, and because they end up on the British side, because the British promised them freedom, you're gonna call them loyalists? They're loyal to some king in England? The concept has some problems. You will find that Africans fought on the side of the United States. We may or may not call them patriots. We'll get to the end of this, and I think you'll find that the Africans were rational, and they took whoever offered them the best deal. Okay, you offer me freedom, I'll fight for you. And it doesn't matter to me, this stuff about the King of England, okay, I'll take that too. And President Washington up in Virginia, okay, I'll buy that. Okay, so they fought for any side that offered them freedom. One of the things that was interesting to me is some research showing that black soldiers, or some runaways, I'll call them runaways, are fighting in Hessian units. Does anybody know what I'm talking about, Hessian units? I'm talking about German units. The Hessian came to the United States, hired by the British to fight in the Revolutionary War. And I'm finding documented studies of Africans, escaped Africans, in Hessian uniforms fighting with the Hessian. It just shows you that wherever the deal could be made, and I can get 3 meals a day or 2 meals a day in a uniform and a comfortable place to sleep, Africans took that deal, okay? I just found that very interesting. The name of the article, as you'll see at the end, is Hessian Troop African recruited by the Hessians in South Carolina. So that was one of the things that really stuck out to me. 25,000, this is an overview, 25,000 Africans left the plantations in South Carolina. About 6,000 left with the British when they left Savannah. They got on the boats and left with the British. Another 5,000 left from Charleston into the Revolutionary War. And another 3,000 left from New York. The names and the locations and the histories of the 3,000 who left in New York are recorded in the Book of Negroes, which is still available. And you can go and look at that book and see where people came from and how they got to New York. While I'm on that issue in the Book of Negroes, the study of African American history has changed because of the ability now to pull together data in large numbers that we could not pull together before. One of my favorite databases is something called 10 Million Voices, okay, where at that website, they're trying to pull together every transaction that they can find with names of where the Africans came from to be sold and where they came from, and that data is being pulled together at that website. There's another website that tracks every ship that landed in the Western Hemisphere with Africans aboard, with the name of the boat, the number of people on it, the captain, and so forth. So we can pull together data now. It gives us new ability to do analysis that we were not able to do in the past. This kind of information was not available when I began doing this kind of work 30 and 40 years ago. Patient soldiers fought alongside the Patriots in the siege of Savannah. If you go to Savannah, there is a statue next to the First African Baptist Church, and just to mention the First African Baptist Church, I think it was established in 1774. It is the longest continuously operating church for Africans in this country, and it was established before the Revolutionary War. And I just think about that. So it had to be established by people who put the church together after doing their work during the day. But the Haitian soldier monument is next to it, and you get the wrong impression. You think that the Haitians were in Savannah, defending Savannah against the British. It's just the opposite. The British were in control of Savannah. The Haitians fought along with the Americans and the French who attacked Savannah, and they were unsuccessful. Okay, but at least the Haitians who came with the French did fight on the side of the American patriots. Former British soldiers, Africans who fought for the British. When the British left, were left with their red coats and their rifles. Okay, what do you do now? The British have left, the war's over, and you're stuck here with these red coats and rifles. What do? They set up maroon communities. Everyone know what I mean when I say maroon communities? They went to the woods and set up their own towns. And so there are communities that were set up because they're left, the war is over. Okay, what do we do now? You can either go back to the plantation that you left, that's not a good deal, right? So you want to have your own town. Anybody know what Petersburg is? Anybody know what Petersburg is? It's called Hardyville. Okay, all right. Two of the largest communities were set up just outside of what was in Petersburg, and we'll talk about that a little bit more detail. And then finally, the transatlantic trade ends in England in 1807, and in the United States in 1808. I mention that because there is this pressure now, this conversation about what people call heritage ancestry. Okay, and by heritage ancestry, they're taught is basically Anglo-Christian culture. And there is some tension in this country about preserving that now because it seems to be threatened by the fact that there's some demographic changes, which are specific and which you can see. And then at the bottom, that the tension of a lot of the political conversation going on in the country now. So I mentioned the fact that the transatlantic slave trade ended in 1808, which means for your African neighbors, they were here, their ancestors were here before 1808, okay? That takes them back 8 to 9 generations. And so when I hear people talk about go back to where you came from, I can say I was here about 1740. When did you folks get here? That is something that folks need to understand, that Africans have been here since before, most of them, 90% of them before 1800. And if you want to talk about going back to where you came from, you tell me that your folks got here before 1800 and we can have a conversation. If Africans wanted to escape, now I'm just talking about the basic study of African American history. If by the way, the number of Africans who were brought to North Africa out of that 12,500 was about 400,000, okay, less than 500,000. I would say that because some people think millions of people were brought to the United States from Africa, but North America, that number is somewhere between 400,000 and 500,000. Most historians say it's about 450,000. And we can do that now because we can count the ships, okay? We know how many people run each ship. And so it's laborious work, but the work has been done. And now we have computers that will do that analysis fairly quickly. Even though some people spent their life in libraries with pencils sort of marking it down, now you can hit a button and kind of get the analysis. I know. Glad they got their PhDs before AI came along. If you were to run away, there were 4 places you could go in South Carolina. I'm going to see if you can figure out where you would go. If you're trying to escape the plantation, where would you go?
Woods.
Anybody got any ideas?
In the woods.
You don't want to stay in South Carolina, you don't have to. Mitchellville, that's the Civil War. Where would you go?
Towards Savannah.
Head south of Florida. I remember the Spanish had given you two Emancipation Proclamations. And so the traffic of escaped slaves is through South Carolina, particularly past Petersburg, which was where there was a short landing over into Savannah. You had to cross the Savannah River. You went by Petersburg if you could. But one of the first, when we had the Stone Oak Rebellion, which is the first large organized rebellion, those folks were headed south to Florida, and there was a reason. That was because there had been a town established outside of St. Augustine called Port Mose, and everybody in South Carolina, the black folks knew about it. And in Port Mose, you'd be free, right? So the first place you might go is head south, try to get to Florida. Where else might you go? Well,
In the woods.
you might head for Charleston. And the reason you would head for Charleston is because there were a whole bunch of black folks and white folks in Charleston, and some black folks were sort of hired out. They lived in Charleston, they worked, and their wages from their work went back to their masters on the plantation. But you could go and hide in Charleston. The other thing that you could do is you could join the indigenous people. If you could cut a deal with some of the Native Americans, which a lot of people did, they became members of the indigenous people and moved around among the indigenous people. And then what is little reported is that there were maroon communities in Charleston, in South Carolina. There were communities in the woods that black people had set up with escaped little towns. They were always raiding and stealing from local plantations. They were called banditti. If you read the stories of that time, people were always trying to get banditti under control because they were raiding plantations for food and for sustenance. So those were the choices that you had. Let me move on to Africans in the Revolutionary War. Again, at 1526, the Africans land with the Spanish, at the mouth of the PG River and established Santa Miguel de Galdape. The reason this is interesting to folks who study African American history is the first rebellion of the Africans in this country. One of the things that happened, this is a Spanish settlement. It is the first permanent settlement on North America by Europeans, by the way. It didn't last long, in part because the Africans revolted, burned down the house of the manager, and moved off and to join the Galdape people, who were the Native Americans. And so when you get to Jamestown, and the chief is meeting with John Smith, he's saying there are white people to the south. He's talking about the fact that there have been establishments south of Virginia, and the Indians already know. We call them Indians. The Native Americans already knew about some Europeans. And interestingly enough, there were some white people, they called them. Okay, they're Europeans. Santa Elena, we've talked about that already, but there is evidence that Africans were with the Spanish in Santa Elena, and this was established in 1566. That's Paris Island, just a few miles from here. And so again, we have Africans moving around in this area in 1566. In 1670, we get to Charlestown. In 1770, we deal with the Boston Massacre. 68, I talked to you about this fort and outside of St. Augustine. Interestingly enough, 68 slaves escaped stealing a boat on Ladies Island. Anybody heard of Ladies Island?
Yes.
Well, they take this boat from Ladies Island and they sail down to St. Augustine. What happened was they were welcomed, and they established a town outside of St. Augustine called Fort Mose, and that is really the first settlement, free settlement of black people in what is now North America. There was one before that in Mexico, but the second one was this one established outside South America. It's a park now. You can go and visit it, but it is important. Somerset versus Stuart. So your British colony, and in England, a case is decided by the High Court, and it is a case called Somerset v. Stuart. And what is Somerset v. Stuart? And a slave, I'm going to use the word slave, even though that's not the word most folks like to use nowadays, had been brought to England by someone from the islands and declared himself free because he was in England and there was no law in England that created slavery. And so they went to court. And the court held a decision that when Somerset escaped and was later recaptured to be shipped to Jamaica for sale, the abolitionist filed a writ of habeas corpus. The court found no legal basis in English law to justify holding Somerset as a slave in England. So you are in the southern part of the United States. Your economy is based on slavery, and somewhere up in England, they have now decided something that sounds like it's a threat to the way you make your living in your economy, right? So it's one of the things that slaveholders in the United States are thinking about before the Revolutionary War starts. And so just this we'll get to fairly quickly. How long have we been at this? 20, 30 minutes? Okay, I don't want to get to the point where you all leave and I'm just talking to myself. Keep an eye on it. This is the census, South Carolina, okay? And so we have slave and white and total. And I want you to see 1770. You will see that the slaves make up 61.5% of the population of South Carolina. And you go to 1780, and the slaves make up 53.9, 54%. The point that I'm making is in 1770 and 1780, there are more black people in South Carolina than there are white people. And that is something you have to think about when a war starts, okay? It is one of the major factors that works into the way the war is conducted in the southern states. And we'll talk about what happens. Okay, so we're 1780. The war is over. Cornwallis gives up in 81, and then the British leave in 1782, 1783. But now we get to 1790, and we see they had free black, which is really very small. But suddenly you look, the slaves are now, there are fewer, the slaves are less than 50% of the population, right? And you get to 1800, and again, the slaves are less than 50% of the population. 1810, you get up to 47%. 1820, your slaves are the majority. What has happened is the black population has disappeared. Okay? And the question is, where did they go? All right, this is during the Revolutionary War. The Revolutionary War causes dissension and upset and movement within the population of South Carolina. And that is the main topic that I want to make, is that this social change and demographic change and political change that takes place within the African American community as a result of a Revolutionary War that loosens the bonds of slavery, because people now have some choices to make. So I just wanted to point out that during the Revolutionary War, the majority population of South Carolina is African American, and they're not spread out equally over the state. You can see by this map that the concentration is along the coast. It's in the rice economy, the indigo economy, and later on in the cotton economy. It's not all over South Carolina, it's not in the mountainous areas, it's here, okay? It's in Beaufort County, it's in Charleston, and St. George and along the coast, right? This is very important to understand. If you look at the census for Beaufort County, and there's a census in the courthouse in Beaufort County that shows the census in 1820, and the population is 80% African American, the population of Beaufort County. Okay, so you have to twist your mind a little bit to think about it. But when you think about it, there are plantations with 300 people, or 200 people, or 100 people, and then 10 people who are sort of managing it. You've got a huge concentration of the African American population along the coast. And that's interesting because what the British and later the North want to do is they want to capture Charleston and they want to capture Savannah, right? And so what have you got? You've got this huge concentration of African surrounding the places that are strategically important. 1775, April 19th, you got Lexington and Concord. 1775, we'll look at what the war has started in 1775. Think about this. The Declaration of Independence is in 1776. So you've got a war going on before you get to the Declaration of Independence. It's not the other way around. You don't declare yourself free and then stop the war. The war's been going on for more than a year before we get to the Declaration of Independence. Then we get to the Dunsmore Declaration, which we'll talk about. Then this is important. So December 18, 1775, the South Carolina militia attacked the enemy on Sullivan's Island. March 1776, the Georgia militia and the South Carolina militia attacked the enemy on Tybee Island. What you should know about that is those were not British people that they attacked, but they were attacking the settlements of black folks who had heard the Dunsmore Declaration and who had left the plantations and accumulated in encampments on Sullivan's Island and on Tybee's Island. The first attacks of the Revolutionary War in the South were not against the British, but against escaped African Americans who had put together encampments. Okay. Then you have the Battle of Charleston, where the British are trying to move into Charleston. They are defeated and they turn around, but one of the things that's exciting about that is a battle where Sergeant Jasper goes over the walls to pick up a flag that had been knocked down and bring it and put it back up, and he becomes a hero. And there's a county nearby here who's named after that sergeant. So what is the Dunsmore Proclamation? Dunsmore is the governor of Virginia, and the colonists are acting up, saying that they no longer want to abide by the laws of England, And so he says the way to get at this and to win this war is to get at the fact that you have a slave society, there are slaves all over the place, and we can just get them to leave the plantations and join the British, we can turn this war around. So Dunsmore issues this proclamation in which he says all indentured servants and Negroes and others, okay, basically are free if they come and they join the British. So now we've got a war going, and what is General Washington's policy about African Americans participating in the army, the Continental Army? George Washington, on November 12, 1775, says neither Negroes, boys unable to bear arms, or old men unfit to endure the fatigues of the campaign can be enlisted. He's decided that he doesn't want black folks in the army, in the Continental Army, okay? Interestingly enough, right after that, you see that this is November 12th. Let me go back. This is November 12th. Let me see if I can go back. Dunsmore is November 7th. A week later, we have this from George Washington saying he does not want Negroes. The British are inviting Negroes, and the Revolutionaries signed the Continental Army saying we don't want them. But then a month later, after learning of Lord Dunmore's proclamation, that the Continental Army changed its policy, okay? And said that if you were free and had previously served in the military, you could continue within the Continental Army. So now the Declaration of Independence is published in July of 1776. In 1778, there is the formation of the first Rhode Island regiment, an all-black regiment that is formed in Rhode Island to fight on the side of the Continental Army. 1778, Savannah is captured. I'll talk about that for a minute if you don't go to sleep. 1779, the legislature rejects John Lawrence's proposal to draft Negroes into the South Carolina militia. There, Mr. Lawrence, who's on the staff of George Washington, says what we need to do in South Carolina, since you have more manpower that's black than white, if you're going to withstand the British, what you need to do is bring the black folks into the army to help fight against the British. The legislature rejected that, saying that would cause more harm than good. General Prevost, this is just something because I wanted to talk about what happened here in South Carolina. General Prevost, retreating from Jacksonboro, coming back to Savannah. Let me just come at this a different way. Imagine yourself an African on a plantation. You got up that morning, normally at sunup, and you're working in the fields, and suddenly a horse is coming down the road from a plantation that's up the road 4 or 5 miles. The next plantation. Now at night, you go over to that other plantation and you visit because that's where your parents are. You've been, when your mistress got married and moved to this new plantation with her husband, you were given to her as a gift, right? So you're in the fields, you're working, and then here comes a horse down the road. The horse is really breathing hard, and they run up to the big house, and then the mistress of the big house comes out with an apron full of silverware and all of the other valuables, and she and an assistant are going down into the woods with that stuff, right? And when they come back, that stuff is gone. And then he rides off again to get to the next plantation. And then while you're in the fields, suddenly some folks in red come marching up with drums beating on all of this stuff. You've never seen anything like this in your life, right? And they turn up the road and they come to the house. And who the heck are these people? And some folks said, those are the king's people. Those are the British. Well, what is all of this about? And then these folks with their red coats go into the big house and take out everything they can find and pack it up and they get ready to leave. And then, Lord in mercy, they get the foreman and tie him to a tree and they whip him the way he whips black people. And folks say, well, what the heck is going on here? And so for the first time, you see the authority of the masters on the plantations being challenged in a way that you've never seen it challenged before. And now, after all of this, what's coming up the road but about 200 black people? Some from the plantation up the road, And what are they doing? They're just following the British. When the British stopped at the plantation up the road, they decided to leave and to follow the British. And so now you have a decision to make, right? You can leave, okay? And so what you should think about is whenever a plantation is attacked by one side, when they leave, the slaves have to make a decision about whether I leave with these people. Now, but in the Revolutionary War, if you are a loyalist, the British are not freeing your slaves, okay? They are only freeing the slaves of the Americans. And when the Americans are attacking the loyalists, they are taking those slaves with them, and they're later selling those slaves as a way to finance their war. So it depended on whether who was coming up the road, whether they're wearing blue coats or whether they're wearing red coats. 1779, General Prevost, who was going to attack Charleston, is turning around from Jacksonboro and is coming back. And he has about 1,000 black people following him because they follow the various armies. And people don't have cars and they don't have bridges. Everybody has to move by boat, okay? So his group, a large group of black people, follow him onto Otter Island. Does anyone know where Otter Island is?
No.
It's somewhere just off into the Port Royal Gulf. It's near Beaufort, okay? Then General Prevost decides that these people who are following us are a real burden. We don't have a lot of money. I mean, we don't have enough food for them. We need to be able to move more quickly than have these people follow us. So he packs his people up, takes the army, and leaves them on the island and does not leave any boats for them to escape. And those who write about this say about 1,000 people perished or were taken back by the Patriots when they got to the island, but folks died of starvation and disease, and those who were still alive were captured and taken back into slavery and sold. Then General, General Clinton then issues the Philipsburg Declaration, which we've talked about, and then the Americans and the French laid siege to Savannah. But now I want to talk about the Declaration of Independence. Are you all still with me?
Yes.
Okay, I just have to check. Declaration of Independence. Now, this morning on CBS, they did a story about Thomas Jefferson, and they took all over Monticello. The one thing they did not do is show you his bedroom, because off to the side of his bedroom is a small cubicle where Sally Hemings used to stay, a slave on Monticello, with whom he had 6 children. Now, you think you're talking about scandals now in the White House? That was the scandal for Thomas Jefferson. When he was running for office, they published stories of him and little pickaninnies who were mulattoes on his plantation. Everybody knew that those children looked like Thomas Jefferson, okay? And he had 6 children. But that's normally not mentioned. And luckily, when I visited Monticello, they had just opened up this cubicle where she had to sleep off from the bedroom. But when he writes the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creators with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The British keep saying, now how can somebody who owns 400 people write something like that and be serious? It is an enigma that we could talk about, but you only have a little bit more time here, so we won't get into it, okay? But this is what the Declaration of Independence says, and the person who's writing this is a slaveholder. Now, as he's listing the 27 reasons why the colonies ought to leave, here he says he has excited domestic insurrections amongst us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages. What he's referring to when he's talking about you've excited the domestic insurrections among us, he's referring to the Dunsmore Declaration, which is asking Africans to leave the farm, leave the plantations, and to join the British. one of the provisions of the Declaration of Independence, he has waged cruel wars against human nature itself, violating the most sacred rights of life and liberty and the persons of a distant people who never offended him, captivating and carrying them into slavery in another hemisphere. Here, in the original draft of the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson is making clear that he understands the injustice of slavery. And he's saying we should get away from the king because he's established slavery. And it's the worst thing. It cannot be justified. You can see what he's thinking here, right? But this provision does not make it into the Declaration of Independence. It's taken out. Okay, this is the first draft. So here he's condemning slavery, and here the founding fathers had a slavery problem. So they made him take it out. Guess who told him that if you leave that in there, we're not joining you? Can anybody? You want to forward a guess?
No.
There are two states. It said, you'll fight the war without us unless you stop criticizing slavery.
South Carolina.
South Carolina was the lead state, and Georgia was the other. As a condition for joining the Union, Thomas Jefferson had to take out this stuff criticizing slavery.
Wow.
Okay. Clinton returns to South Carolina. Charleston surrenders May 8th. Let me tell you about the Ethiopian balls. During the time that the British had captured Charleston, if you were running away from your plantation or your owner, you went to Charleston because you could run around, the British were running the place, and your slave master was not there. You read the writings about that time, and people who are living in Charleston are complaining about the fact that black people are running around without direction. They're just acting up like they're equal to white people. And as a matter of fact, they're having these frolics, they're having balls. Guess who's coming to these balls? The British officers dressed up, and they're escorting African women to these balls. And it is a scandal. How could you have such a thing going on inside there? I just thought I would let you know that this thing about Africans running around unsupervised and having balls and and hiring themselves out. This was going on in Charleston while the British were in charge of Charleston. And it's outrageous. So I thought I would let you know about that. So in 81, General Cornwallis surrenders. In 82, the battles are still going on, even though Cornwallis has surrendered in 81. There's still battles going on because you didn't have internet. Okay, you don't have TV. You don't have telegrams. So what's happening in Virginia has not moved to South Carolina, North Carolina, and Florida. The battles are still going on, small skirmishes. So in 1782, the Southern militia is running out of money, and General Sumter is given slaves to pay off the militia. And if you just take a look at the notes, you can get a whole Negro, or a half Negro, or a quarter Negro. And the way that works is a full man, young man, is a full Negro. A woman is maybe a half or a quarter, and children are a quarter, right? So it depends on your rank that you get. In 1882, the Assembly for the second time rejected John Lawrence's proposal to allow black participation. In 1782, the British evacuate Savannah, and I think I've told you that about 6,000 Africans get on boats and leave with the British in 1782. The British evacuate Charleston, about 5,000 get on boats and leave with the British out of Charleston. The notes at that time are of Africans swimming out to the boats, trying to get on the boats as they're leaving, and the British have to use bayonets and cut some fingers off to get them to let go so the boats could leave, because people are so desperate they don't want to be left. So then we get to the Treaty of Paris, and when we get to the British evacuating New York City, about 3,000 people go. But the interesting part to me is, I'm reading my books, and these maroon communities are where? Outside of Hardeeville, and they're attacking people 5 years after the war is over, outside of Hardeeville, trying to bring the war, trying to end catch Africans who had fought with the British. Now, this, I think, we're wrapping up, honestly, we're wrapping up. I want to just talk about 5 interesting people, just to give you a sense of how things actually work. Christmas addicts. How many of you have heard the name Christmas addicts?
Yes.
And you are told that Christmas addicts is the first person to die in the Revolutionary War. Christmas addicts is shot in 1770. The Revolutionary War starts in 1775. Now, what's suspicious about this story is that he's one of 6 people who were killed. The only one we know about is Christmas addicts. What about the other 5? If he's such a patriot, what about the other 5, right? When there is a trial of the officers who shot into the crowd in Boston, the attorney who represented those soldiers is John Adams. Anybody know who John Adams is? He's the 2nd president of the United States. He was their lawyer. And he says Christmas addicts, and we know now Christmas addicts was an escaped slave from Framingham. Okay? He was taller than most people at the time, and he was known for loving to get into a fight. And John Adams says he walked up to a group of British soldiers, grabbed a rifle, and smacked one of the soldiers. He was always ready to start a fight. And so the British fire into the crowd. And he's the first one to die. But John Adams' position is Christmas addicts started a fight. And that's not inconsistent with the reputation he had in Boston. He was always ready for a brawl. Now, that's his story. The story that has come down by black people who are hungry to have some hero is, okay, he started the Revolutionary War. You don't find any real historian who signed on to that story, even though it's part of American mythology. So there is a different side of Christmas addicts, and you make of it what you want. But let me talk to you about, let's see, in his defense, the British soldiers after the war, let's see, the British Master John did describe Christmas addicts, though not by name at first. In closing argument in 1770, Adams referred to addicts as a mulatto and portrayed him as the instigator of the violence. Adams argued that Addicts was in the front of the crowd, leading the confrontation, brandishing a club, egging others on. His description was not flattering. Addicts was the son of a Native American man and an African woman, and was a slave in Framingham and had escaped. The next person I want to talk to you about is Colonel Ty. Colonel Ty was a black loyalist guerrilla leader in the American Revolution. He was born in Monmouth County, New Jersey. He was the most feared and respected black military leader, one of the most feared black military leaders of the American Revolutionary War, originally enslaved by a Quaker. But anyway, this guy led a patrol of black soldiers, but they fought for the Loyalists, and was a feared person around New Jersey. He got shot in the hand, he got shot in the arm and died from the infection. But when you read it, when you're reading this book called Simon, by Simon Sharman, and he's talking about all of the things that Colonel Ty was famous for in his raids, that he was feared, you're thinking, what? There's a black guy leading a unit of folks around New Jersey attacking the Continental soldiers, and I didn't know about it, they didn't teach me about it. Well, anyway, Savannah fell to the British, and was held by the British until they left in 1782. The night before the British got ready to attack Savannah, a man, an escaped slave, named Quanamino Dolly showed up in his tent. Has anyone ever heard of Quanamino Dolly?
No.
Okay, so Quanamino Dolly shows up and says, you only get ready to attack the Americans if you will give me a gold coin. I'll show you how you can get into Savannah using a secret path. And so they gave him a gold coin. And he led the British into Savannah on a secret path, which was a path used by escaping slaves. Only the slaves knew about this path. The American soldiers dropped their arms and Savannah was taken over by an escape, because of an escaped slave, okay, who came and led the British into Savannah. Quamino Dolly. Oh, by the way, the historians are not clear on whether or not he got the gold coin. But some of them say he got the gold coin and lived a good life. Savannah was attacked from the rear. And the notes are in the British notes of the colonel. Many enslaved Africans in the southern colonies supported or joined the British after Lord Dunmar's proclamation. Quamino Dolly's actions fits into a larger story of black loyalist participation. James, I just don't want to talk about just black folks who joined the British, it's the other way around too. Interestingly enough, James Armistead Lafayette was a Continental Army double agent tasked to spying on the British during the Revolutionary War, okay? He joined the British and told them he would spy on the Americans, okay? But it was actually working for the Americans, okay? So he was feeding the British the wrong information, and at the same time setting the British up for the war, for the battle in Yorktown, okay? And so the British fought, you were trapped at Yorktown, as you know, by the Americans and by the French, but largely because of information that Mr. James Armistead fed to the British before that battle took place. Now, I think that's an important note to know about what happened at Yorktown, right?
Yes.
He was promised his freedom. But at the end of the war, his masters refused to give him his freedom, saying that he was not really a combatant, he was just a spy. Now, interestingly enough, when Mr. Lafayette returns to the United States as part of a tour after the Revolutionary War, he finds Armistead and says, come on, folks, give us a break. And so he was freed and given some money and lived a long and useful life, we're told. Jim Capers. Has anybody heard of Jim Capers?
Yes.
There is much discussion about Jim Capers in this area. Okay, and the story that you will hear is that Jim Capers lived to be 110 or 112 years old. Okay, and that he fought in the American militias. And I am in a personal fight with the folks who are trying to tell that story. First of all, if you believe this story, he lived to be 110. All right, and he applies for his pension when he's about 105 or so. It turns out that he dies before the case is resolved. But because he is married to, well, let me put it this way, he's living with a woman who is a slave. She's not eligible, okay? But he has this long record of battles that he was involved in, and I have no quarrel with that. I do not doubt that he was in each of those battles and that he was wounded, and as a member of the war, because he was a drummer, he's entitled to some compensation. But he has to plan, he has to prove that he was there. He apparently dies before the federal government, the new government, could make a decision in 1842. The problem I have with this story is the way it is recorded. Capers enlisted in the militia. And the problem I have as a historian is if South Carolina had clearly had legislation saying that Africans could not join, how did this guy get up and walk down the street and sign up an enlistment? I don't believe that. I don't believe anybody who was an African during the Revolutionary War could just get up and walk down to the enlistment office and say, sign me up, officer. I just don't believe that's the way it worked. I don't believe he could have gone without the permission of, quote, his master. And when you look at the notes, you find out that someone named Capers goes with him, who is a Major Capers. What makes more sense to me is when Major Capers went and signed up, he took Jim with him. And as a matter of fact, when you look at the records, Major Capers says that Jim Capers was his most valuable asset. So I think he was a slave. Now, if you read the stories that are being told now, they say he was free at the end of the Revolutionary War. But when he's applying for his pension, he's in Alabama. all right? And those who write the story suggest that he was freed as a result of his service. But in Alabama, if you were a freed slave, you had to leave within 30 days of your being free. So there is some conflict there that doesn't quite work for me. And then he's married, quote, married to a woman who is a slave, right? And they have 6 children. The law of slavery was a child inherits the status of the mother. So if he had 6 children, his 6 children were slaves. I don't believe he was a free man, because you don't go to Alabama and stay in Alabama where the law is you have to leave within 30 days after you're free. I don't believe there's any evidence that he was ever free. I don't doubt his valor. I just don't think that's the way the story really worked out, because it conflicts in too many ways with what we know the law of the time to be. I think we're wrapping up. You've been kind. I got one more slide. Okay, so in this book, written by a black historian, who I have a lot of respect for and who I knew, this book is published around 1981, by Benjamin Quarles. Benjamin Quarles looks at these issues that we've gone over, and he comes to this conclusion. Black loyalties were not to a place, nor to a people, but to a principle. That principle was, whoever offers me freedom or the best deal, I'm going to take. And you need to understand that black people made up the majority of the population in South Carolina. And the reason the South Carolinians did not want black people to join the militia was the one thing that scared them more than being subjected to England was to have black people with guns in their midst, and they absolutely were not going to have that. Twice, Mr. Lawrence came to them and said, we're low on troops. What we need to do is we need to bring the black people in, give them arms like the British, but in South Carolina and in Georgia, they said, no, no way. So finally, those of you who are still with us, I'm just showing you the bibliography, the books that I use for reference in case you're interested. They're up here. One of them under papers is a book written by Stephen McAree. Interestingly enough, African-American slaves during the American Revolution. It's an undergraduate paper. It's a young man who's an undergraduate who's interested. And I wanted to cite him because I thought it was good work, it was an undergraduate, and it added to the conversation. Thank you for your attention. You have been...
Might want to take a picture of it and refer back to it. In case you wanted to take a picture of it. Someone had asked me during the presentation about a book. These books right here belong to Dr. Meldon Hollis Junior. The books on the table over there you may check out. But if we do not have these in Bluffton, and I don't believe we do, you go ahead and take a picture of the book or write down the title and go to the reference desk. We're happy to look for it for you as an interlibrary loan from another branch within SC Lens. And if they don't have it, we can always look as an interlibrary loan. That's something that I do here, meaning we go outside of the system to get that book for you. But let's give,
Can I say something?
you sure can.
The reason these books are here is this book was written by an African American. There's a lot of literature about what happened to African Americans during the Revolutionary War and the Civil War, but it's interesting to go to a black scholar who I think brings a different perspective, right? And this book is written by a British scholar. And I thought it would be interesting to find out what the British thought was going on in the Revolutionary War. This is the most exciting read, this Rough Crossings. But that's for people who are really interested in the history of the African American population. I just don't know how you write the history of an event in a state like South Carolina when the majority of the population was African American, but you don't get what was going on with that population during the Civil War, during the Revolutionary War. So Yes, as was mentioned, I am the chair of the Gullah Museum on Hilton Head Island. We have made some significant improvements to that site if you haven't been there recently. And next Saturday, we had the rain today, so that we will not have the next Saturday.
That's not true.
We'll have the Gullah Food Festival, and we think you'll find that an exciting event if you have the time to come by. So I invite you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Let's give Dr. Meldon Hollis Junior a big hand. Thank you so much, sir, for giving us